Hi, I'm Brandon Salmons from Balanced Equestrian, and today we're going to talk about the reputation that donkeys have for being stubborn. So we we get asked this question a lot from people who are not in the equestrian world. If we let people know that we are equine trainers and we train horses, mules, and donkeys, they say, "Oh, aren't mules and donkeys stubborn?" And even in the horse world, we see people that have this idea that mules and donkeys are in fact stubborn. So I'm going to read the dictionary definition of stubborn. So stubborn is having shown dogged determination not to change one's attitude or position on something, especially in spite of good arguments or reasons to do so. So, we can ask ourselves, do donkeys show dogged determination not to change their attitude or their position on something in spite of a good argument or a reason to do so? It may seem that way, but I would probably argue that most of the time we don't give them good reasons or give them a good argument for why they should do what we want them to do. Or in our communication, it's somehow unclear. So we have donkeys that are very willing and very happy to do what we ask them to do. But the communication has to be clear and they have to feel safe in their environment. So first of all, anytime there is stimulus, animals tend to have a few different reactions. So one reaction may be a flight or a fight response. We see this a lot in horses because they have a pretty big flight response. If they feel pressure or stimulus, they tend to move away from that prior to fighting. Donkeys, however, have a higher fight response. So when they feel pressure, they tend to lock it down and brace against that pressure. Just because it's called a fight response does not mean that they're fighting us, that they're attacking us, or that they're being aggressive. Low-level fight response just looks like brace. And if you think about the donkeys you see around you, when people ask them to do things, we see a lot of brace. So why is that? Well, with horses, we tend to use their flight response to our advantage. So if they don't want to do something, we just add some pressure and they tend to kind of do it. They may do it with tension, and there's actually an art to getting horses to do things without tension or less tension. We also do dressage, so that comes up a lot in dressage. A horse can do a dressage maneuver, but if they're kind of tense within that maneuver, it's just not as powerful and beautiful as it could be if they weren't holding tension. Donkeys have that same response. Their response, just like a horse may have an overreaction to pressure, donkeys also have that overreaction to pressure, but that looks like brace, not flight. So let's talk about stimulus or pressure for a moment. Anytime you are using pressure, when you use so much pressure that they go above what we call threshold, that if you think about, most of the time we think about threshold as with fear. So if you do something that creates fear, they no longer learn. So if you think about any learning environment you've ever been in, that learning environment needed to feel safe for you to learn in. Anytime you felt unsafe, the nervous system and the brain are too busy worrying about the fear to then worry about learning. So let's just say you're going to lead your donkey into the barn for the farrier to trim their feet. You go out, they're used to you handling them and scratching them, so they are friendly and they let you walk up to them. You put the halter on and then you go to lead them. Well, they won't lead. And so then you use a little more pressure and they still don't want to go. And then you use a little more pressure and now they're scared of the barn. And then you use a little more pressure and now you're dragging them or doing your best you can to drag them into the barn. I see this all the time. Unfortunately, once you get to that point, they're just kind of surviving the moment and you're just trying to get done what you've got to get done. There's no real learning involved. And so I think it's our responsibility as trainers that learning does become involved at some point, right? Another idea for training is that we need to break everything down into small bite-sized pieces. So if you need to get your donkey into the barn to trim its feet on farrier day, you don't do that all in one day. You might work on haltering and catching the donkey. Then you need to work on little step-by-step pieces of how much can you get the donkey to lead. Then you need to work on handling their legs and their feet, and picking them up, feeling and not being worried about the stimulus of the rasp or the nippers on their feet. There's lots to do to prepare for farrier day. If we don't break things down into these small bite-sized pieces in training, it tends to be our human way of going about it. We add pressure, we add force, and then they brace and they become stubborn, right? So I don't really see them as being stubborn. I see it as we are not being clear and we're not giving them good reasons to do what we want them to do, because they always seem perfectly willing to do the things that they want to do. They have plenty of energy to run around when they feel the need. They have plenty of energy to play with their other donkey friends when they feel the need, right? It's the energy that we're requesting that tends to be an issue. So let's talk about how we reinforce what we want in training. So when we ask our animals to do something, we give them a cue, and then they will do the behavior that we're asking for, and then we reinforce it. And that's either with a positive reinforcer or a negative reinforcer, typically. I don't actually think one is right or wrong or good or bad. Positive, negative doesn't mean good, bad. It's just math. It's, are you adding something to reinforce the cue, or the behavior, reinforce the behavior, or are you taking something away to reinforce the behavior? To me, I want to use as many reinforcers as possible. So if I'm using pressure that doesn't create the fight response, the brace that we're talking about, that low-level, refined pressure, then I can use that as negative reinforcement successfully. Let's talk a little bit about expectations of our donkeys. So we can only expect them to do the things that we have taught them to do. So if I've never worked on bringing my donkey into the barn for the farrier on farrier day, then I can't expect my donkey to do very good in that action on that day. Sometimes we can't even expect the things that we have taught them to come through. We all have good days and bad days, and sometimes they're just not going to do as well as we would like. But one thing is for certain: the person that I have to become to be a good donkey trainer, I have to be very mindful. I have to be in the present. I can't be thinking about anything else in my day. I have to calm myself down. That kind of person is the kind of person that my horses and my mules are drawn to. that kind of person is the person that my dogs are drawn to. And that kind of person is actually the same kind of person that other humans are drawn to as well. So I end up becoming a better person or the kind of person that other animals and other people are drawn to because of my donkeys. And so this is a gift that they have for us, is that they help us improve ourselves so that other animals and people will want to be around us.